But I kept, when we were in Germany, I used to dye my hair black, and I would go to the beauty shop and get it. Well, they would dye it for me, and it cost 2 marks. That's like 50 cents. I've got the recorder. We had some kitties one time when I was a little girl, and I was about 10 years old, and most of our cats, or some of our kitties, stayed in the barn. And this one litter that she had, I went over there, and I knew they were there. They were about 5 weeks old, and I heard them, and they ran in behind a can because they were wild. And I reached down in the back of them to get him, the back of the barrel to get him, and he scratched me good. Oh, all of those. I mean, my whole hand was scratched. And then after we milked, Mother always gave the kitties some milk. She had a little pan there for them, and they'd all come up and eat. Even if we weren't getting much milk, she'd always give the kitties some. And we weren't allowed to have the kitties in the house, but sometimes me and Mary, when we played misses, and I forget what her name was June, and mine was Marigold for a while. And then I changed it to Rosalie because I liked that better. And we'd take the cat, the one that stayed at the house, and we'd take her and we'd dress her up in doll clothes and put her in we had a little baby carriage, and we'd put her in that and push her around.
Poor cat. I hated to have been your cat.
And then I'll tell you something else. We used to have a sheep. You know, we had lots of sheep. I don't know how many, but anyway, they always had their lambs in the springtime. And this one old sheep only had one nipple, so she couldn't. And every year she had twins. And so we thought this one year she had a twin, and we were petting we always had a pet lamb, and he got to be mean, and he would see us out, and he would come after us and butt us and knock us down. So I was in the outhouse one day. I told you this last night. We were in the outhouse, and and that lamb saw me. I looked all over and didn't see him anywhere. So I came running for the gate to get back in the yard, and I had to jump the fence. I couldn't even have time to get the gate open, and I had to jump the fence, and I mean, I jumped it good. Oh.
I don't know. You used to have the skinniest little arms.
And she would grab my arm for something and dig her fingernails into it, and my arms hurt so bad.
We're talking about Aunt Lou.
Oh,
Oh, you turned it
Well, she did. She would get mad at us, and I was just a little old puny thing. And she would grab my arms and sink her fingernails into the sides of my arm. Of course, she thought that was. And Mother and Daddy would go to town, and they would leave her in charge. Oh, brother, was it ever a charge?
Well, tell about your stockings or your knee highs.
What about my knee highs?
The ones you got for Christmas.
Oh, we were going on a Sunday school convention, and it was just at one of the little towns, maybe 30 miles away. And I was going with the Ferrises. And everybody decided that they would wear hose. So I asked Mother if she would buy me a pair of hose. And she says, well, now, honey, they cost an awful lot. And they were only 37 cents, but that was a lot back then. So whenever I got ready to go and I was all diked up and Mother sent Lou in the bedroom to get my hose. And when she brought them back, they were anklets. And my heart just sunk. But you know, I would have worn those. I'd have worn them to the last mile before I would have disappointed my mother and told her, no, I want hose. I don't want these little short stockings. Or little white socks is what they were. But anyway, I went on and we were had our convention, and I probably picked up a new boyfriend. That used to make Lou awfully mad. When all the guys would flock to me and none flocked to her. And I didn't really know all about that until Mary told me.
Well, tell them about the spoon.
What spoon?
Her spoon. You threw that.
Oh, little. Well, Lou had a little fork, and it only had 3 prongs, and it had a little duck on the handle. And she loved mashed potatoes, fried potatoes, like all of us did. And she got mad at me one time. Usually, I think she stayed mad at me. And I went in and got her little fork, and I threw it back in the pantry. And all we had a lot of stuff in the pantry, but Mother always saved those old big flour sacks. She bought flour, 25 pounds at a time. And she saved those for something or other, and it was dark in there before electricity. And so we'd usually just take those big old flour bags and just throw them back in the pantry. Well, that's where her little fork with the duck was on it. That's where it went. And, of course, she went crying to Mother and to Daddy with it, and I almost got a whipping, but I didn't. Anyway, so when they tore the house down, there was the little fork. And I got that, and I gave it to her after I came to Texas. In fact, it was just a couple of years ago. And I went up there, and I gave her little fork. And she says, oh, I don't remember this. I don't remember this little fork. And I told her the story behind it. Let me set it right here.
It's already on.
Oh.
I can't see you.
When I was a little girl or a teenager, Mother and Daddy got Buddy to live with us. And he said, he'd reached up on the counter and got a butcher knife. And Mother said, give me that. He said, I'm going to hurt you or cut you with this Bowie knife. He couldn't say butcher knife. He said this Bowie knife. When we lived in Germany, the guy that lived up over us, he taught driving school. And he had this big old bus that he would teach people. So when that bus was out there wasn't room for anything else. So we wouldn't go anywhere. We would stay, our car parked right there. So we'd have a parking place when we came home. And he had a son, and his son's name was...
Art Krause.
No, it was Karl Heinz. And you know what we called him for the longest time. And she'd say, Karl Heinz? We thought his name was Karlahoinz. And that's what we called him, Karlahoinz. And his mother was very attractive. And someone came to the house one day, and a German, and Karlahoinz brought him in, and he knocked on my door, and he says, "Sprechen Sie Deutsch?" And Karlahoinz says, "A bissel." And I knew what he said. You know, I couldn't speak much German, but I knew what he said.
What does it mean?
And do I speak German?
What does abyssal mean?
Means a little bit. Abyssal means a little bit. Years and years ago when we lived in Germany, me and Carl, and we'd get a babysitter and we'd go to the movies. And he would always say, "Well, I don't want anything." So I said, "Okay." So I would always get something. And I love those Bitto honeys. You know what I'm talking about? I love those. So I got me one of those and a bag of popcorn. Popcorn was $0.25, by the way. And we'd sit down in there, and Carl would say, "Hey, give me some of that." And he would help eat my popcorn. And I said, and then before I had eaten my Bitto honey because I knew what his tricks were. And he said, "Could I have some of that Bitto honey?" I said, "No, I ate it." And then another time we went to the movies and I got popcorn and he got peanuts. So, well, he bought the peanuts before we went in at a little store there. And he bought peanuts and I got popcorn again. And we went in there and I didn't want any peanuts. And we sat down and he ate most of the peanuts. So when we got home, he said, "I think I'd like some more of those peanuts." And he opened the bag and they were all wormy. Oh, I thought that was so funny. My mother would say, when me and Mary would get into a fight, which wasn't often, and we didn't. Well, I guess it was often too. And Mary would hit me, and I would go cry to Mother. I mean, she could slap hard or hit me with something, and I would go crying and tell Mother that Mary hit me. "Well, why don't you hit her back? You're bigger than she is." So I thought one day, okay. So the next time Mary hit me, I hit her back, and Mary went crying to Mother. "What do you mean hitting her? You're a lot bigger than she is." Couldn't win. Me and Mary used to, well, I told you before, we played Mrs. And the corn crib was our house. Maybe I told you this before. And we used to go out and we'd sift to get some dirt, and we'd sift it through a piece of screen. and we'd make pies with that, mud pies. And then we'd take a daisy and we'd pull off the white things, the petals, and that was our coconut. And then we would take the other stuff and make a pie, and that was a lemon pie. We'd make with the little yellow things in it. And we made a cupboard one time, and it stood off of the floor with two, we nailed it together. And it had two legs on it, which reached all the way across. And we could have done better just to have set it on a little box, as I think now that we could have done. And then we had the canning jars used to have they had zinc lids, and then they had a white thing on the inside of them. That was glass. And when Mother couldn't use the zinc thing anymore, we used the lids to put our pies in, and that little white lid, or little white thing that was inside the lid, we'd have to go pound real easy to get those out, and that was our plates. And then sometimes we just had broken glass for plates. And everything that Lou couldn't find in the house, she'd run and tell Daddy, well, look out in the corn crib. I know it's in the corn crib. And we used to get so mad at her. I guess you get it by now that Lou was mean to us. And of course, me and Mary, we weren't mean at all. And we always had fun, and she liked to read, but she liked to read those romance magazines.
Evidently, that's where Linda gets it from.
And every time she started reading with those, me and Mary would run and tell Daddy, she's in there with an old magazine. And then another time, we all came home from school that day, and we needed some kerosene for our lamps. And we went, and somehow I had to go get that kerosene, and I knew I had to go through this field that had a bull in it. And so I went ahead and went over, and we got it in a glass gallon jug. That was and it was hard to carry. Didn't have nothing on it to make it easy to carry except that little loop. And so I went over and got the kerosene. It was 10 cents a gallon. I got the kerosene and came back home, and I looked there, and I had already closed the gate when I saw that the bull was about 15 or 20 feet away from me. And I thought, now, I think if I run fast, I can beat him to the bridge. And of course he couldn't come up on the bridge. And I looked around, and he was about 10 feet from me, coming with his head down and pawing in the dirt or in the grass. And I took out to the fence, and there was a bunch of, they were elders, and it's a type of bush, and they had little purple berries on them, and they made good, or so I was told, elderberry wine. And you could make an elderberry pie if you wanted to, but Mother never did. We always had pie with something else. And that bull was coming after me, and I threw my oil over the fence and got all scratched up with the elderberries, and they had barbed wire on top of the fence, and 2 strands, and I got into that and scratched myself all up. And you know, that bull ran up and down and up and down, and I just knew that he was ready to jump that fence, and he was going brrr at me, and it scared me to death.
How was he going?
And well, that's okay. And he just scared me to death. And I got home, and I just knew that Daddy would go kill that bull, but nobody said a word.
No, tell about
And then another time, me and Mary and Harry, we were on our way to school, and just at the end of the bridge, there was a family of Renixes that lived there. And they had one daughter named Hazel. Well, Eula Renix was her name. And she had this big old black dog that would bite. And then she had a flock of geese. And just as we would come out, we would get those geese would come after us with their mouth open, hissing at us, and it was terrible. So my mother went over and asked Eula if she would kind of keep her geese away until after we got through there. And she said she would, but she didn't. And then a couple of mornings after that, and they'd get a hold of your legs and really pinch if they caught you. And then we went on over a couple of days later and was going through, but we had a broom handle with us. And you know what we did with that broom handle? One of those geese didn't come hissing anymore. And I guess she got it and probably had it for supper. I don't know. But anyway, those geese didn't come after us anymore. And then another time, we were in school, and it seemed like the meanest kids around lived in Glady. And these Louks, they had one girl and 12 boys. And we got out of school one day at noon, and Harry had to go into the store and get a 25-pound bag of flour. And they didn't even live the way we lived. They followed us. Anyway, so I picked up a rock and stuck it in my pocket. And Luther came down, and when Harry got his flour, he came out, and he went up and he knocked the flour to the ground, but he had his arm around Harry's neck and was choking him and putting him in, hitting him in the ribs. So I reached in my pocket and got my little rock, and I threw it at him, and he died not too long ago, and he had a big gash still on his head from that. But he let go fast, and then here come his old ugly brother Arthur, and
What did you hit him up above there?
And when Arthur came, I picked up another rock, and I said, "You get out of here, or I'm going to hit you too." And he says, "I'm going to get you." But he never did. And he went home, and his mother asked him what happened to his eye, because they would whip them good with a broom handle or anything. That's how mean those boys were. And anyway, and the mother, Rose, asked him what in the world happened to his eye, and of course she went to get some stuff to bandage it up and everything, and he had a 4-inch gash above his eye, and the skin just dropped down over his eye. Anyway, and his mother asked him what happened to him. "Have you been fighting again?" And he said, "No. Mary Kearns threw a rock at her cow, and it hit me instead." And that was a big lie, because he didn't want to even tell her that a girl had done that. And then when I was a baby, my mother lived with her mother, and her father worked on the railroad with the train. So this train would come down off of the mountain, And my mother would put me out on the porch in a little box that my grandfather had made for me. And I only weighed, I guess, 5 or 6 pounds when I was born. And anyway, and that was, and she'd put me in one of these. They called them hunkies back then, but they were Italian people, and they worked on the train. And they used to come, and this one old hunky really liked me. And Mother was afraid to leave me out there so much, she's afraid he'd steal me. And he called me Little Brown Eyes. And he was always buying me stuff, little toys and everything. But, of course, Mary got most of those, I imagine. No, I'm kidding. Mary wasn't even born then. The old house where we used to live in, that was over there in the meadow, when we first moved in there, our whole house was covered with fleas and bed bugs from where those people that moved out had left them. And Mother worked and worked and worked, but she finally got rid of all of them. But oddly enough, the name was Taylor that moved out of the house. And they had 6 children. I don't know how in the world they lived in a 4-bedroom house. I mean, a 2-bedroom house. We only had 4 rooms. But anyway, we managed. Me and Mary used to sing together all the time. I played guitar and she played mandolin, and we would go around singing at what's those things that you, reunions, family reunions. We'd sing at those, and we really liked it. And then we had an organ, and Daddy bought that when I was, I guess I was about 10 years old, or 11, something like that. And do you know what? He said the one that learned to play the organ first could have it. And and I learned to play it first. And I used to play at church. And it was, and I remember the first time I got up, Mabel and Rosina were cousins, but they was in the same grade that I was in. And Rosina used to pick on me, pick, and we'd get into fights and everything. And I really think the last fight we had, I think she won. I can't remember now, but I slipped on ice and couldn't get up. And I went to, we went to church that one Sunday night, and Mary Bonnell and Sully Ferris used to play the organ. Well, neither one of them were there that night. So somebody said, I know he can play. I was so embarrassed. And I went up there, and you should have seen the look on Mabel and Rosina's face. and I played, and everybody sang, and then they came up congratulating me that night. I mean, when it was over. I know one time me and Harry, Mother and Daddy had gone to town, and Harry talked me into going snake hunting with him, or going fishing. So we went down there along the river, and we happened to see there was a big black tree there had been burned out. And we saw a big black snake in that tree. So down on the river's edge, there was a whole bunch of rocks. So he went down and picked some up and threw them up on the bank. So we got those rocks and we started hitting those snakes, or trying to hit that snake in there. And all of a sudden we saw up on the top there was another black snake. And I guess we killed 5 or 6 of them. We killed all of those snakes, and one of them fell down in on the rocks that was below. Now these were just little rocks, and they fell down in below. And Harry went down and got one of those snakes, and it was still alive. We hadn't completely killed it. I don't know why he didn't kill it while he had it down there. And he got that and took a stick and flipped it up on the bank, and it went right around my legs. I'm telling you, I bet I ran 5 miles and didn't take a step. It scared me so bad. And one time, well, several times, but at this one instance, the cows didn't come in that night. They normally would come in by themselves. And we couldn't, so the next day, me and Harry, I believe, had to go get those cows. And we always took the dog with us, and they always had a bell. Well, this time, the cow lost her bell. So we had to go on, and those bells that Carla asked were 2 of the bells that we had. And you had to have a big strap, like a belt, to tie around their neck to tie the belt on, or the bell on with. And there was a place, and it was up one, I guess it was about 2 or 3 miles from our house, and we called it the Tom and White Holler. Holler. And there were railroad tracks. Well, they had pulled the railroad out, but they still had, it was a nice path, or not a path, a little road to walk in. And you go down there, and they had one place, and it was so nice, so peaceful. Well, the cows liked to go down there. So we went down, and they weren't there either. So we kept hunting and hunting and hunting. And it was late when we got back. It was dark. And Mother, of course, was worried to death about us. And we got home, and then the next day after school, we had to go looking for those cows again. And so we started off in a new way, and they had gone over 2 mountains, and up one side and down the other, and then up one side and down the other of that mountain. And we saw tracks of bear, but anyway, we found the cows. And we saw tracks of bear, we saw a lot of deer. And anyway, so we told the dog to go get the cows. And he did. He went down and rounded them up, and we took them home. And they hadn't been milked for 3 days, so 3 or 4 days, I forget which, 3 days, I think, that they hadn't been milked. And Mother since the milk had been in the bag for so long, she just milked it and then poured it out to the pigs. They love milk. And then the next night she milked. And they normally wouldn't go that far.